All right, 10:02, here we go. Good morning, y'all. My name is Marnie Keski. I am a cultural preservation specialist with the 1854 Treaty Authority, overseeing the education and outreach division programming. 1854 Treaty Authority is an intertribal natural resource management agency. We work for the Boys Fort Band and the Grand Portage Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa in implementing and protecting off-reservation treaty harvest on the lands that were ceded to the United States government in the year 1854, which is all of present-day northeastern Minnesota, about 5.5 million acres. And welcome. So under our education and outreach initiatives, primarily is to serve our constituency in making sure that we have active harvesters and safe harvesters, so everybody is aware and up to speed on harvest skills within our tribal youth and families, but also working with the public on understanding what it means to live on ceded lands and our trust responsibilities, and also being able to interpret what our resource managers within house, some of their monitoring and management programs. One of the needs that has surfaced over the last few years is being able to connect the researchers who are trying to meet the needs or would like to meet the needs of some of our tribal community members, and educating them not only in what it means to work with a sovereign government, but also to be aware of like the cultural awareness and respect and reciprocity type stuff that goes along with building those relationships. So our employee Chanda over there, our education outreach aide, was part of a really cool project this past spring, an internship. And before I hand it over to her, I just want to give a couple housekeeping type info here. I don't need to tell you where the restrooms are because this is a virtual presentation, so you're on your own. Good luck. And just to remind you that in registration, you did have to sign a waiver that released us for recording this event. We do have a lot of colleagues that were interested in participating, but had conflicting meetings today. So we are recording and we'll make it available on 1854 Treaty Authority's YouTube channel for anybody to check in the future. With that, I am going to hand it over to Janda and Carter.
All right. I guess I'll start. And Buju, good morning, everybody. Glad you could join us, talk about this project. And so just to add on to what Marnie, the basics of what Marnie said, this has been this interdisciplinary project, and intercollegiate project, which, is kind of unique. Academia tends to like silo things off into what they think is digestible chunks. And we were sort of challenged to not do that and kind of think about things in an interdisciplinary way and an intercollegiate way and talk across disciplinary boundaries. And Luke at Jennifer Moore's prompting, I think, reached out to me to see like, would I like to be involved in this project as a professor of American Indian Studies? And I thought, oh, that sounds interesting. Where's my lab coat? And I still haven't gotten my lab coat. And but I came in and kind of thought like, what am I doing here? This is science. Luke's talking about phytoremediation and Jessica's talking about microbes, and Rory and Ian are doing all this stuff in the lab, and their nails are always dirty. And so but it took me a while to kind of figure it out, and like what I decided that I could add to the group was maybe a more I don't know, philosophical, political consideration of like what, as Marnie said, like what does it mean to be on ceded territory? What does it mean to be doing research on ceded territory? What is territory, you know? And so we talked a lot about land and as a philosophical and a spiritual and a physical place, and tried to sort of think about, well, how do you do science in light of these sort of indigenous values about land and the relationships we have on land, um, and sort of thinking in that more broader Native studies context that it's not just the human relations that matter, it's actually all the other relations matter as well. You know, the land, the water, the land, the plants, the fish, um, and how we all live in this place together. So I think one of the things that we did from the Native studies side is kind of help the team consider like how do we decolonize the way we think about science, the way we think about research, and sort of put it into some other, you know, shift. You can still do the science, but you know, you want to shift like why the science is being done. It's not just a fascinating subject on its own. It actually has impacts on communities. It actually has impact on um, political relationships you hadn't thought about. Because I don't think, and I think Chanda will talk about this in a second, maybe, but um, but I don't think a lot of researchers at UMD and other universities think much about the native land that they're on, whose land that they're on, and why that matters. So I met Chanda last fall when she was taking one of my classes, and I was starting to get more involved in the bioremediation project. And I thought, oh, Luke and the team had provided me money for a research assistant. And I thought, oh, Chanda's the perfect victim. and and um, because Chanda has a science background and a Native studies background and deep ties to Native communities in Duluth and northwards. So Chanda, one of the things she really wanted to emphasize, and I'll turn it over to her now, is kind of thinking more particularly about treaties and stuff like that. So, Miigwech, thank you.
Buju, Chanda Indishnakas, Uzan Dudame, Onagaminting and Kuchaching and Dunjaba. Hello, my name is Chanda. I am, as Carter just said, one of his research assistants on this project. And my role with this project was to kind of be like a tribal liaison, do some connections here and there. And something I really wanted to do during this project was talk about the treaties, talk about some of the history with the team and kind of educate them about that, as well as to just kind of talk about how this all connects into what Native communities are facing today and issues with science and how it's been very, what's the word? Extractive with Native land, with like Native culture, with all of that. So that's kind of the role that I took on. Yeah, I guess I don't really have much else to say about that. But I'm really glad to be here. Nice to meet you all.
I think you should say a little bit more about treaties and treaty relationships if you
Okay,
want to.
yeah, okay. So what I really focused on was the 1854 treaty because the St. Louis River is obviously on that land. So we had a meeting with the team earlier this year and we talked about the treaty. We read through it. We talked about some of the cases that happened, the court cases and everything. Yeah, sorry, I wasn't really prepared to talk today.
I'm gonna interject if you don't mind.
Yeah.
When you are working with Native communities inhabiting and sharing a space, you do need to be aware of their story, their history, and most importantly, the targeting of this project is looking at the St. Louis River Estuary. Can you pause that? We're sitting in the same room, sorry.
Yeah.
So the Anishinaabe people have a migration story. It started from the East Coast where they originally inhabited and moved to the West. It was a migration that happened over a long period of time and different groups of people, many people overall, but they had 7 stopping places along the way. They followed the Migas shell and they followed a prophecy that was dreamt from one of their leaders. And they knew that they were supposed to find the place that they were to be when they found the food that grows on water. And that place happens to be in the St. Louis River Estuary. That's what makes this area so important for the Anishinaabe and all of the inhabitants within.
And just to one of the things that we talked about quite a bit about with the treaty, and that I think relates to that is, the treaty is a political document and it lays out, very geographical and money and finances, and it's very unimaginative, in terms of how it thinks. It thinks in terms of property um, and rather than within terms of relationship. And now I'm getting a knock at the door. Dang. But one of the things we talked about was kind of that there is a moral sense behind the treaty. It's a contract with 2 peoples. And hey, I'm on a meeting, but come in. And so this idea that there's a moral kind of component to the treaty is important. And I think that motivated a lot of our discussion and thinking about things. So anyway, so if you're going to guarantee the right to people to fish and harvest and gather from a territory, if you start poisoning that territory, then you aren't really honoring kind of the moral fiber of the treaty. I don't think that would hold up with the Supreme Court, particularly this Supreme Court, but I think it helps us think about, what goes into that, and knowing the migration story feeds into that too, I think. So anyway.
That was really well put, Carter. Thank you. Chimiquetch. With that, I'm wondering if we want to dive into speaking with the researchers and kind of their roles and what they bring to this and what they're trying to tackle. If we pass it over to Luke.
Sure, I can start it off. So there's a whole variety of researchers involved in this project, and some of them are in the College of Science and Engineering. So I'm one of them. My name is Luke. I'm an assistant professor in chemistry. And I think I'm sort of the one who got this project all sort of started, aided and abetted by Jen early on and Jessica. But I think maybe I can tell a little bit about my own background, and I think that will give some important context perhaps and connection to what Carter and Chanda have said so far. So I'm a scientist that studies the chemistry of plants, and the field of plant chemistry has a long history, and some of that history is is interesting and fascinating, and some of it is a bit ugly. And one of the uglier components of the history of plant chemistry is sort of I would think of it as, or at least I think of it as, the theft of indigenous or traditional knowledge in the form of plant chemists going and learning about important medicinal plants from indigenous individuals or people that had traditional knowledge, and then taking those plants and turning their chemicals that they produce into commercial products and profiting therefrom. And so in general, in the field of plant chemistry nowadays, there's a desire to try to begin to hopefully undo or try to, I don't know, counteract some of that damage. And so as a member of that field of people that are studying plant chemistry, I thought, well, I need to, try to participate in that activity. And I saw an announcement from the University of Minnesota Duluth, saying that they're looking for interdisciplinary groups to work on projects together that were connected to the local area and to communities in that area. And I'd always been fascinated by the idea of remediation. This is the ability of, well, I should say, I've always been fascinated by the idea of phytoremediation, which is the ability of plants to absorb from water and soil contaminants or pollutants that might be there. And I thought, maybe, I know that in this area, mercury is a contaminant of great concern, and that it impacts a large variety of communities, including Native nations in this area. And maybe there's an opportunity for some type of interdisciplinary group from UMD to kind of come together and study under the umbrella of remediation or mercury remediation, and to get to know each other and learn about each other's disciplines and connect with other communities. And it has sort of, like, we've been working together now for about 9 months, and there's a number of different disciplines that are represented: biology, chemistry, journalism, environmental education, and American Indian Studies. And we've all been learning from each other under this sort of umbrella of mercury bioremediation, and a number of different themes have come through in our work together, and you just heard about some of them from Carter and Chanda. But I think one of the themes that I should mention here that's been most impactful for me has been thinking about different ways of different ways of understanding the world and different forms of knowledge, and what it means to have different types of knowledge, and to recognize that certain types are sort of by society at large valued over others, and that there's an imbalance there. And as part of that, something that we have discussed that I think is important to think about is how, or I should say, is how, sort of as like sort of trainees of dominant science, essentially, how we are trained to go about our scientific tasks, and how the people of, this area that we are doing science on behalf of, ostensibly, how they view the scientific acts that are the scientific experiments that we conduct, and whether they view them as useful or helpful or appropriate, and so on. And I think Caitlin might talk a little bit about this a little later on. But I think that one of the themes that has come through for me is that there are many different ways of doing science, and that learning about these as someone who has been trained as sort of a traditional, like, dominant Western scientist has been really valuable, and makes me think quite a bit about the way that we perform experiments in the lab, but also I think about how I go about my daily life, essentially. Yeah, sorry, Marnie, I'm reading your comment in the chat here. Yeah, yeah. So the comment in the chat here is from Marnie. I'm not. Maybe it's just to me. Maybe not everyone can see it, but it talks a little bit about looking at species as relatives, and I think this is one of the questions that we're going to talk about perhaps later, but I can mention it briefly now. We work with a lot of different plant species in the laboratory, and as part of this group, we've been learning about a worldview in which we being like everything that is part of land. So this is you know, plants, microbes, fish, rocks, and so on are all relatives. And so thinking about the subjects of our research in the laboratory as relatives has been interesting. I guess I found it far more impactful to think about our relatives in the context of daily life. I mean, I'm about to take a delivery of like a load of firewood to get ready for next winter, and thinking about those logs as my relatives is something to, well, anyway, something to think about. But I think so I'll sort of finish up here, but I think the message that I'm trying to deliver is that you know, there are a number of scientific groups, or I should say like science and engineering groups represented here. And one of the things that working together under this bioremediation project has challenged us to do is to think about how we perform our experiments and for whom, and how do the groups that we perform our experiments on behalf of view our activities. And that's been quite the learning experience. I don't know if Ian or Rory or Jessica want to add anything to that.
I'll let Ian or Rory talk, because I think that, Luke, you pretty much summed up perfectly what we've been, you know, as the indoor kid myself, the completely like indoor scientist. I mean, this has definitely been a really enlightening process of rethinking how I do science. But I will let Ian or Rory talk, because they're the ones who are mostly in the lab doing the science. You know, we just think about the science mostly, Luke and I, and Ian and Rory actually execute. So
yeah, I guess I can talk about do we want to rock, paper, scissors?
You can go first.
Okay.
I think you have a little bit more.
Okay, cool. So my role in this project has been on the biology end of things. So I work under Dr. Luke Busta, and I do most of my work with plants, and kind of like developing a system where we could track the movement of mercury and the formation of methylmercury over time, and see if our bacterial counterparts and our plant counterparts interact together in a way that would benefit the health of the St. Louis River estuary. And yeah, a lot of my work has been kind of learning, as Luke has said, learning how to put things into more of an indigenous worldview, and respecting the plants and the relationships that we have with them. And I did read one of our starter questions, and that one I still do not have a very good answer for. But I think it is very it's very relevant to what we're talking about today. But other than that, that's kind of my role, and I'll let Ian talk about his bacterial role.
Hi, yeah, I'm the graduate student under Dr. Jessica Sewer, and my main focus is on microbiology and the bacterial relationships between the bacteria and the plants we're working with. So kind of looking at how we can influence the way that mercury moves through the waterways, and potentially find a way to stop it from moving further down. But I just want to say that this project has been a great opportunity for me to really get the outside view, because typically this field tends to be very like in the lab 24/7, you know, and engaging with the community has just been such a wonderful experience to me, and such a great opportunity that I feel like I probably wouldn't have been given the chance to do otherwise. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, guys. Can we hear from the I suppose it's not social science, but you have a journalism aspect to the research as well. Can we hear from those folks?
Yeah, I can start the conversation here. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jennifer Moore. I'm an associate professor of journalism in the Department of Communication at UMD. And as Luke and Carter both mentioned earlier, so my involvement with this came when a colleague of ours told Luke, hey, you should talk to Jennifer Moore because she's done work on the St. Louis River. And what I'm going to do right now is actually, maybe I'll do it after I'm talking. I'm going to we have one of the student journalists who worked with us here too, but I'll share a report with you all that you can download. Back in 2016, 2017, 2018, I was involved in a Knight Foundation funded project called One River, Many Stories. It was supported by the Duluth Superior Community Area Foundation. It was a journalism project where we were seeking to train community members to tell their own stories about their experiences with the St. Louis River. And one of our community partners was inspired to do this in honor of a journalism professor at UWS who had passed, and it was his dream to make a documentary about the St. Louis River. And I'll share the report so you can read all about, what we did. But the one big lesson learned from that, even though we had some folks from the Native community involved, Paul Demain participated in a skill session, who you may know as a regional journalist. Mark Trahan, who at the time was at NDSU, came over and spoke with folks about, Native storytelling. Ivy Vineo was really involved in the project, and Arnie to a certain extent. But one thing that we really learned is that the Native community really should have been more of a focus on the project, and that was something we learned. This was all, as I've learned from someone called Passion Labor. We received the small grant, which basically paid administrators and students, but my colleague and I who ran this really just sort of did this on our own time. And that's one of the bigger challenges, what this group has talked about too, is trying to get more funding. But I'm going to let Ella talk a little bit. She's one of the 2 journalism students who were funded by this project to start learning about, doing storytelling and science, and of course, having this Native Indigenous perspective, how critical that is to really understand, what's happening with the project. So I'll stop talking. I'm going to let Ella, why do I keep saying Ellen? I'm so sorry. Ella talk. I think I'm merging my vowel and my consonant there. And if anybody has any questions, happy to answer them too. Thank you.
Yeah, hi. I'm Ella Schoberl. I'm a communication and journalism undergraduate. So with this project, I've been working under Dr. Moore as a journalistic research assistant. So my role has mostly been reporting and writing on the group. There's a lot of moving parts to this project. It's interdisciplinary, and there's just a lot of different events that we go to, ideas that we discuss and focus on in our project. So I think my sort of main goal has been to be able to sort of just break it down and be able to explain that to a wider audience, which has been really amazing. So I think the main way I've sort of done that so far, I just joined in January. The main way I've done that so far is I wrote an article about one of our events, the Teen Science Cafe, which we presented at in February. And so in this article, I just sort of wrote about each of the different disciplines, how we're sort of, reframing how our connection with the land, and then, breaking down science. I discussed the activity that we did, which involved environmental education with our marble run. And then I heard a lot of great feedback from the students who attended the cafe as well. So I got to interview a lot of people on the team, as well as some of the students at the event. So I think for me, this project has been just so fantastic and just so fun to, make more connections with people at UMD, to learn about, all of these different forms of knowledge, how they, not only come together, but are stronger together. And it's just been really fantastic. So I'm just happy to be here.
I will add too, oh, thanks, I was just looking for that, Carter. Thanks for sharing the story. Aubrey Ecker was the other journalism student who's doing the multimedia side of this project. And she's interviewed, I think, almost everybody who's on the research team. She has big plans to try to document this in some ways. And that story that Carter just shared, her video of the Teen Science Cafe should be embedded in that story. One other thing that I'll add to that I think was really critical about this project, as well as it moves forward, is really thinking about the storytelling aspect of this. And that one of the goals of that One River project that I mentioned before was really getting, understanding that we need to be more cooperative as opposed to competitive when we think about storytelling with, our media partners, as well as just people in the community who have stories to tell in those perspectives. And really listening to the community and trying not to be the expert who is doing this, one-way model of communication where there's this deficit idea, like you just need more information and then you'll change your mind, but more of this collaborative way that really intersects with the educational component of this project too. And I'll say my role was very small. I think the one thing, Luke, you may remember, I said, the only way I'm going to be involved in this is if you get somebody, and I said, like, please ask Carter if he'll be involved, because I've always wanted an excuse to do something with him. And I'm really glad it worked out. And it's really gone beyond what I could have imagined. And I'm just so grateful to be a part of this project too, as small as my role has been. And I think that'll sum it up for the journalism part, unless you can think of anything else you want to add, Ella.
Well put. Miigwech. I think we should probably hand it over to the outreach portion, Caitlin, that is heading that up.
Great. Yeah, thanks. My name is Caitlin Hughes Perry. I am a graduate student. I work with Dr. Elizabeth Bolo in the environmental education program. And so we've been part of this project from a sort of community-centric piece. Environmental education generally is about connecting people with the natural world in a way that allows them to be more informed and responsible citizens of the world. And in the context of this project in particular, it's been about that. It's been about connecting, people with the natural world, but almost in like a reverse capacity, in the sense of it's been about connecting people with the science that we're doing. And so it's the environmental science about the natural world. So it's kind of like an indirect avenue there, which has been a really interesting way to approach, I think, the work that we've been trying to do. And I think when I got involved, one of the very first conversations we had was about decolonizing the science. And we were talking about it with a lot of the research that's been done in that space, and in sort of almost an abstract way. And as the project progressed, we had the opportunity to really dive into more of what that looks like, specifically where we are in the world, in this place, and with the people that exist here, both Indigenous communities and non-Indigenous communities. And that has made the work certainly a lot more compelling. Not that it wasn't before, but taking it from the abstract and drilling it down into what does it mean to take all these ideas about how you decolonize science and how you connect people with the science that's impacting them, connect communities with the science that should be being done kind of in their name or for their benefit. And then when we layered in, or when Carter and Chanda helped us layer in the treaty piece, I think that really, it kind of brought everything together in a really meaningful way, because not only do we have these, kind of moral obligations to be connecting the science that's being done to how it actually is affecting the people, but there's tangible legal frameworks that exist in reality for making sure that we're maintaining these natural places in a way that fulfills the treaty obligations, not just I say, but not just meeting kind of the relationship-based responsibilities that we have just as humans that exist here, but also really looking at what it means to be in this ceded territory and keeping these spaces healthy for the people that are living here. So that's been sort of the environmental education philosophical piece, I think. And then from a practical perspective, we've just been working on trying to get the project out into the community in various ways. And we've done that through some events at UMD, some events through partners out in the community through the St. Louis River Alliance and the Lyceum events. This event today, and we'll hopefully continue to be working on those pieces that are more like in-person, activity-based, interactive opportunities for folks to engage, to sort of supplement in with what's going on in terms of our communication through the journalism side of the house. And so that's been really neat. And that's also an important piece, I think, from the environmental education perspective, to be bringing the voices of the community into the project a little. I think that when I started, I had anticipated that being a more robust piece, but I think that one thing that I have certainly learned is that this process, in order to be meaningful, is just a lot slower than I think that I thought, or a lot of us thought, and that's not a bad thing. That's okay. And so taking the time to build the relationships before sort of asking for a bunch of input or trying to get, you know, people super involved is a good thing, because it means that engagement is more meaningful. And I think that, you know, that's I guess maybe the last thing I want to say about from the environmental education perspective is just taking away from everything I've learned through this process that it's really about, at the heart of everything, it's about those relationships, and it's about both the relationships between the research team that I think we've all really appreciated, we've all grown from, and we've all been able to improve our own personal and professional practices, and also do better work as a team as a result of those relationships, but also our relationships with the community, and with the partners that we've started working with, and individual community members, and then the responsibilities that come out of those relationships that really can guide the work that's being done from the science side all the way through to my piece, the kind of community engagement piece. So yeah, and being able to be like there for the community, as opposed to, you know, perpetuating extractive research practices and that kind of power dynamic in knowledge production that Luke alluded to earlier, and really unwinding that and getting people feeling like they have agency, and that they have a voice and a role in all of the parts of that process has been, yeah, a big part of what we've been working on. So that's what I've got.
Okay, so we're gonna move on to the Q&A portion of this meeting. And we have a few starter questions set up here, so I will just start off here asking, from any new perspectives you have learned, have you engaged with any Native communities regarding your project next?
I mean, I guess I can jump in here. I think this is something, you know, I mentioned earlier on that I studied the chemistry of plants, and part of the impetus of this project was to begin to, I don't know, try to repair some of the damage done by sort of past plant chemists. And so taking on this project was at least from my perspective, part of it was hoping to identify groups or individuals that would be interested in working together in the area of plant chemistry, potentially in the area of remediation, sort of like, in the course of over the course of the future. And so I'm hoping that this meeting today can be part of that larger effort to meet individuals or meet groups of people or become one degree of separation less, like more closely connected to folks that might want to engage in that way, if that makes sense.
I can
Anybody
add
else want to add to
something.
that?
Yep, sorry, Marnie, and I was just, you took my, I wanted to mention some of the resources that Marnie actually put in the chat for everybody to make sure that they click on and download before we're off this meeting, because I think it's really important to recognize that I think UMD is really behind in this area of interdisciplinary and intercollegial research. It's my hope that, and not necessarily for me, but some of the other researchers on this team might pursue more opportunities, including more faculty, and doing this work that's so critical. Just want to make sure that, because I think Marnie shared some resources to try to imagine, how things could be different. We have some really terrific opportunities with not only a new system president, but also a new chancellor who's starting here very soon. But I think that the opportunities are they just need to be supported, with graduate student and undergraduate student researchers supporting faculty somehow, for the labor as well. And the critical piece of doing the work in the community and listening to the community. And I guess that's trying to make an awkward segue here, is that I would really love to hear, I think one thing that all of us in universities need to do is just do a lot more listening, as I'm not illustrating right now, so I'm going to stop talking.
Well done, Jennifer. We all need to do more listening. You're right. I had a question from some of the education that I've done. We do a lot of teaching on conservation tools that might work for achieving a goal and how they fit into the cultural view, cultural respect, and the values of a community. And one of the things that, with massive invasive species invading our area, people have looked to, well, can we do something like seed saving? And from an indigenous perspective, those seeds being the fruits, the beings, they're living beings. You can't necessarily put them away and lock them up. That will take away their life. So I understand in the first stages of your project that you're doing a lot of experimental work with microcosms or mesocosms. And have you internalized or have you considered any impacts to the plant beings that you're working with? And do you find yourself having any inner challenges or in regard to disrespecting a relative, or how have you come to be okay with it?
Yeah, I can answer this. So maybe I'll start by saying, so I was raised and educated in a system that views natural resources as resources, right? Not as relatives per se. And so this concept of viewing everything here that's part of land as relatives is relatively new to me. And so my thinking about conducting experiments with plant beings, which is, I think, what you're asking about, my thinking about that is not, it hasn't been long lived. It's been going on for maybe 6 months or something like this. So, but to answer your question more directly, I mean, as far as our work in the lab is concerned, we have several major experiments going on, but one of the biggest is where we have several plants set up in like little artificial growth environments, like a soil pot with some water recirculation that we can control the rate of water movement through the soil and so on. And the idea is to understand if changes in rainfall patterns, aka changes in how frequently they're watered, affects the conversion of mercury into methyl mercury. And so this is sort of what we're trying to identify. But the conditions that we're using, we're trying to make them as similar as possible to what is found outside in northern Minnesota. And so as far as, the concentration of mercury or something like this, what those, plants are experiencing as far as that single aspect is not too different from what they're experiencing out in our backyards. And so I guess, your question was maybe about how, how the scientists are feeling about this, or how the, experimental scientists are feeling about this. So I guess the answer is that doesn't trouble me as much as some of the other aspects of my life trouble me, having learned about this perspective of thinking about all the things around me as being my relatives. I think I mentioned a little bit earlier that, we have a wood burning fireplace at home, and we get big deliveries of firewood every year. I don't know. Did that tree want to be burned in my fireplace to keep me warm in the winter? I'm not sure. But I think things like that, or even, I don't know, sometimes I go to a big grocery store, and the ones that are very like like Super One or something, and you see all of the shelves with all of the items out on the shelves. Like, what, I don't know, that I think thinking about the scale of society and the way that I participate in that is more troubling to me than the activities we do in the lab. Not that I'm saying that, just to be clear, I'm not saying that asking questions about what we do in the laboratory is, bad or irrelevant, that those questions are irrelevant. I think those are important things to think about and have been one of the most valuable takeaways from working together in this project. But I think in addition to that, your question was, how does this make you feel? How do you deal with that? And I think my response is, boy, first, it makes me feel like I need to deal with the other elements of my life, or come to terms with that, or think more about that, or learn more from others who have thought more about it. Sorry, this is a long response, but I think maybe that's I'll stop there. Thanks, Jen, for the inspiration.
It was a journey. You're right.
Mm.
I think also I want to add, I mean, again, I come from a background very similar to Luke's as far as like, we have to kind of disconnect ourselves, or we're taught to disconnect ourselves from whatever the living being is. I mean, I've done animal research before, and there's a disconnect that you have to have for that to happen, and trying to reframe that and bring it back in. I now, from like a bacterial standpoint, more think about it like as if I can understand these organisms better, and maybe that is like inside of a lab in a controlled environment, but that can then understand what they might be doing better in the actual world, and understanding that will allow me to support those relatives better. So it is kind of like yes, I am having to sacrifice a few to gain a better understanding, but that knowledge will help us support the land better overall.
I think I kind of want to also touch on one part, I guess in light of like the sacrifice of these plants that they're giving to us. I think we've throughout this project, we've learned to think more about our relationships with that, and how what that sacrifice really means. And then as far as like collection goes, Chanda's been really helpful at teaching us how to be respectful when it comes to collecting organisms, or collecting our relatives from nature. And then what Luke said about how we come to terms with it, the fact that they are grown in our lab, similar to how you'd find them if not slightly better than how you'd find them in nature. Just like in terms of the mercury concentrations they're dealing with, helps me think that we're not necessarily damaging them, we're just observing them rather than entirely just like, okay, now we're going to give you a bunch of poison and deal with it. And yeah, I guess that's all I really have.
Does anyone else in the audience have any questions for our team? Anything you guys want to ask, say?
I was most concerned about some of our colleagues with the MPCA, DNR, EPA, other federal agencies that are working with some of the area of concern objectives for the cleanup of the St. Louis River estuary, and seeing how, you know, some of the stuff might interact, and if there were questions from them that might pertain. I only see one or two folks from external agencies. They're kind of quiet right now, but I am wondering if any of our colleagues that are watching their recording in the future, where they might be able to find contact information for you guys.
So we have a email. I don't know, does the chat go with the recording? I can put it in the chat. That, you know, we all in theory have access to. I check it currently and make sure that any questions go to who they need to go to. So it's just bioremediation@d.umn.edu. It's pretty straightforward. We don't have a website or anything. I mean, alternatively, any of the faculty, I think that their contact details are all listed on the UMD website, the various pages. But anything that gets sent to the bioremediation email, you can get a response to. So definitely any questions, comments, or concerns that anyone has about our work, we'd love to hear from you.
I can jump in from the PCA. I'm Andrea Plevin. I'm not directly involved in the AOC work, so I can't really speak much with that. Jenny Brentrup, who's on the call, and Tom Estabrooks, we're involved in the current effort to develop TMDLs, total maximum daily load studies for the mercury impairments in the entire St. Louis River Basin. We do have a technical advisory group. Trent Wickman from the Treaty Authority is on that group, as well as Nancy Schultz. So we are working with them. I'll put our email addresses in the chat. You can definitely contact us directly if you have any questions about the TMDL work. I can say it's been great, like knowing about all this work and learning about all the researchers today. I've been jotting down all your names. You may hear from us in the future. I don't know, Jenny, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, thanks, Andrea. Hi, I'm Jenny Brentrup. I just want to introduce myself really quickly and just say, yeah, I'm at the MPCA and working as a research scientist on this Mercury TMDL project. So it's really nice to get to meet some more people doing some similar work in the estuary. And yeah, we're really interested in some of the, working more with some of the Treaty Authority and 1854 Treaty Authority. Yeah, Tyler Casper's been really involved in our technical advisory group, which has been wonderful. And we also been working with Nate Johnson at UMD a little bit too. So there's a few other folks, but it's also wonderful to hear about more people also interested in a lot of this work. So I hope to, follow up with some of you, and thanks again for including us and offering to, have this little webinar. So.
Thank you guys all for attending. I just want to give a big old miigwech to everyone who took the time out of their day. In the chat here, I'm going to post this. We have a link to an evaluation form. It will also be included in a follow-up email afterwards. If you could fill that out, that would be great for us for future programming. So yeah, that's about all. Giga Wabaman, have a good day. Yeah.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you everyone for taking the time.
Ego Abelman.